Well, hey everyone, it's Monday and time for another Monday Mastery. It's time to wait for a couple of folks to jump on here because we're just now going live. And it's been it was a long week last week. I was up in Michigan as for those of you that were here um, on Monday last week. Hey Teresa, thanks for joining in. And lots of work, lots of maintenance on some real estate I own up there, and ended up coming back a day later than anticipated because I found I had a drain pipe that was frozen, and so that was a big 1 day project that hopefully I've got it taken care of, but I know there will be some adjustments later on. Hopefully you all had a great weekend. Um, and are looking forward to the start of a good week. It's about 70 or 72 degrees here in Kansas City, and it's nice for a change. I was up north, and there were a couple of days that it was, I don't know, 40, 45, but there were a couple of days. Well, the day that I left, Saturday morning, it was 9 degrees, and I got down here and it was 59 degrees. So a 50-degree difference. Anyway, so this week, let's get going. I wanted to continue. Hey, Shar, thanks for joining in. You're in Florida and going out with friends soon. So we'll have to leave early. Well, that's okay. I'll give you a break this time. And anyway, I wanted to build on what we've been talking about over the past few weeks. We talked about getting emotionally healthy. We've talked about um, gaining clarity on what you want in a relationship. We talked about the four cornerstones of great relationships, building a solid foundation. Then we talked about I think the next subject we need to talk about is love languages. And I talked about it in my blog last week and a short video on Facebook and YouTube. And I want to go a little bit deeper because I think love languages are a part of communication, but I think they're a separate part of communication. When we talk about communication, we talk about the words we use, tone of voice, the rate that we speak. Are we speaking fast? Are we speaking slow in a casual mode, or are we excited about something? And then there's just inflection and tone, and there's so many components to body language, facial expressions. There's so much to communication, but I think this one component in and of itself is huge in a relationship. It's understanding, well, number one, knowing your own love languages, but then it's also understanding your partner's love language and being able to speak that language. And I think until I know from personal experience, I have a tough time speaking languages other than my own. And you can learn a new language. It just makes at least for me, it makes life more difficult, um, because it has to be a conscious effort, at least continually for me. And I'm guessing that it's probably the same for a lot of you. And when you have to continually think about, oh, what would she like, or what would he like, or how is he going to react to this, or how is she going to react to that, it causes additional, and not that this is a bad thing, but it causes additional thinking. And it's not a bad thing, don't misunderstand me. But when you naturally speak the same love languages, when you naturally speak the language of gifts, for example, which is not my strong suit by any stretch of the imagination. But when you think of gifts, or when you think in the terms of gifts, you naturally give each other just little things, and the things that you do, the gifts that you do give, they don't have to be real expensive things. They don't have to be um, priceless heirlooms, or but it's the act, it's the thoughtfulness behind it. And so when you speak on those terms, when you speak on each other's terms, you know, you just naturally connect on a deeper level. You know, my love language, my primary love language is acts of, or that's my secondary. Acts of service is secondary, but physical touch, you know, touch on the hand, holding hands as we're walking, that means the world to me. Hang on, let's see. Mike, hey, thanks for joining in, Mike. Mike says, I'm doing some soul searching to try and determine what my primary love language really is. It's not as easy as I thought it would be. No, but Mike, I think, if have you read the book, The Five Love Languages? And I'm assuming you're I'm assuming you're single. And you should read this, the singles edition or the singles version, if you haven't. And there's the I think like a 25 question test or quiz at the end of the book after you've read the book. And you know, one of the things, Mike, and I'll admit that that mine have varied just a little bit over time. When I first took the quiz, oh gosh, it must be 10, 12, almost 15 years ago. Four of the love languages all scored reasonably close, and one didn't, and that one still doesn't show up. But my primary has always still been physical touch. And I think if you've read the book, go back and are still having problems, I'd go back and read it again. Or as you're taking the quiz, um, I would think more deeply about the questions that are being asked, and try to clear your head of any possible relationships that you might be relating it to. Because I found that the first time I took the quiz, I was relating the answers to somebody I was seeing at the time. And it did skew my answers just a little bit. So if you're having problems, make sure that you're answering those questions based on you, on what you like and what you like to do, and not trying not to influence your answers with what somebody else might think, or what somebody else might want, or might think of you. Rod says the other side of that coin is that if you do the opposite of their love language, you cut them way deeper. If they are an affirming works, harsh words impact deeper. Absolutely. And you know, and Rod, let's see, Rod says, I'm physical touch followed closely by acts of service. Yeah, you and I are very, very, you're about the same there. And my experience is that when you're trying to communicate somebody, and I'll use me as an example. I can, when I first read the book, The Five Love Languages, I got to the part on gifts, and it just dawned on me just like that I now understood why I had such problems picking out Christmas gifts for my mother and for others, you know, and gifts anytime, actually, and it literally is for anyone. Now, can I do nice things? Absolutely. Can I, you know, when I walk by a store and I see something that reminds me of someone, can I pick it up and give it to them as a gift? Absolutely. And you know, those acts, those gifts are very well received. But when it comes to Christmas, a birthday, an anniversary, or some special occasion, oh, it's to me, it's just simple torture. And I'm sure for those of you, and I've dated women that physical touch was not their primary love language. And for me, sitting next to somebody like that is like having this brick wall. There's just a chill between, or a frigidness between the two of us, and it's like, I want to reach over and hold her hand, and she's kind of, moves her hand away, and it's like, so if we don't know what our partner's love languages are, or if we're not speaking the same love languages, it makes it very hard to connect. And it because when you're speaking similar love languages, it just takes your connection to a much deeper level. And Teresa says, I'm giving acts of service and hospitality. Well, that's and those are good things, Teresa. And so when you're looking for somebody, you should be looking for somebody that also is that also has gifts as a primary love language and acts of service. And so, at least that's my belief. The author of the book says, you can learn to speak other love languages. You can learn uh, to communicate in those languages. But for me, I find it very, very difficult. You know, if just because I do. And I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying that at least for me, that when we're on the same page, when we're talking the same love language, it's just much easier to communicate. I can put my hand on yours, or I can put my hand on your shoulder, uh, and express compassion, or just with a touch. I can express love just by reaching over and grabbing her hand, and it's just, or affection. It's, and those things are spoken without words. And for those of you that are words of affirmation, I know you need the I love you, I appreciate you, I I'm thankful for all that you do for me. Um, so there's so many aspects to it, and it's one of those things that I think we need to take a little bit of time. We all need to take a little bit of time in doing that. Hey, Mike, I hope that's kind of helped a little bit. I want to scroll back up to Mike and make sure that I covered your comment there. And again, you haven't commented back, so I don't know if you have actually read the book or if you've just done the quiz. But it can be confusing because a lot of times, and I guess going back to my point, Mike, is that when I first did the test, I had four of them that were the four of the love languages that were clustered very close to each other as far as the quiz score. Um, but my primary has still always remained physical touch. Acts of service has always remained my number two, and they're very, very close, very close. They're within a couple of points of each other. And then in more as I've progressed, the other two, words of affirmation and quality time, have gone down just a little bit. But gift still doesn't even register on my quiz as one of my love languages. So Mike says, I read it a long time ago, but need to review it again as a single man. Agree with your assertion that maybe with a partner, it's easy to be swayed by their wants, etc. Exactly, and that's when you really need to focus on what your wants and needs and desires are. and that will give you uh, a more accurate uh, assessment of what's important to you. And you know, it's when it comes to love languages, I you know, you don't have to be a perfect match. Uh, you know, again, mine are acts of service and physical touch. If hers are physical touch, or maybe hers are quality time and physical touch, I can work with that because at least one of hers is up near the top of my list. So you know, when we're talking when we're talking similar languages, it just makes life so much easier. And again, it takes the relationship to a whole new level. It goes beyond just communication and being able to talk to each other. It's almost undescribable when you connect. You just take your relationship to just a whole nother level. It gets you get so much deeper. You understand each other. um, when there's an argument or an upset, if you're giving her gifts and she needs quality time, she's going to look at you and think, what the heck are you doing? You know, that's not what I want, that's not what I need. But she may not understand or he may not understand what you're trying to communicate. you know so it's one of those crazy things that in order to have the best relationship possible, I've just become convinced that you need to speak similar languages, love languages. uh, so Mike, I hope that's helping. You know, I'd go back and read it again and see what you think, or even if you go back and take the quiz again and just focus on uh, on your answers, what you want, what's important to you, and not thinking about what anybody else wants, or not thinking about any other relationship you've had. Give that a try and see if that doesn't give you some clarity. So anyway, yeah, it's a pretty simple, to me, it's a pretty simple, pretty basic concept. When you start stacking all these things on top of each other, you're building up some great compatibility. When you start making sure that you're emotionally healthy, when you're clear on what you want, when you know what your foundation, the four cornerstones are, then combining this with love languages, you start to develop a uh, a really strong connection with somebody. You develop a really strong compatibility. Does that mean the relationship is going to, or this is the person you're dating or the person you meet is going to be the one? Not necessarily. There can be a lot of landmines along the way, but the whole point of putting all these pieces, or understanding all these pieces, and getting all your ducks in a row, so to speak, is to take away as many of the roadblocks and the hurdles that we run into in relationships, and to try to build on a solid foundation. Because I guarantee you that life is going to happen, and things are going to come crashing down from time to time. Somebody's going to lose a job. There's going to be a death in the family. Life happens. There's COVID-19, and let's talk. Let's talk a little bit about stress there. Where we're all restricted in movements, or to some degree or another. They've placed the fear of God in all of us, or the fear of death in all of us. And so that can be kind of intimidating, um, and can put a lot of pressure on a relationship. And when you can remove as many of the pressures, as many of the roadblocks, as many of the problems as possible, you stand a much stronger chance of making your relationship work, or finding a relationship that's going to last. And with most of us that are divorced, well, even if you're widowed, the odds are still the same. The second marriage is more likely to end in divorce. The third marriage is even more likely to end in divorce. By the time you get up to the fourth or fifth marriage, it's like an 85 or 90% chance of divorce. And the whole idea is, if we make better choices up front, if we if we take time, if we're patient, and we understand all of these parts that have to fit together for extraordinary. Now, can you find somebody that doesn't have all the parts and still make it work? Absolutely. I look at couples like, there's a famous political couple. And their names just uh, James Carville and Mary Matlin. Uh, they're polar opposites politically, but there's something that draws them together, and they are quite a magnificent couple. To hear them talk about it, but I firmly believe, in my experience in coaching, I I found that when you take as many of the roadblocks out of the way as you can, it just makes life so much easier. Then you're not trying to fix something that's broken on the other end, after you're married, or 5 years down the road in a relationship. You're it it's so easy to get into a relationship and just ignore the any red flags or any of the problems that are potentially there, and say, yeah, this is comfortable and it's okay, I don't like this, but I can live with it. But it's not really fulfilling. It's not the deep connection that I would say 98 to 99% of us really truly desire. you know, but statistics show that about 85% of us have settled. And I settled in my marriage. When I married my now ex-wife, there were things that I recognized early on that said, yeah, I really don't like this, but I didn't know any better. And hopefully that's what we're all here for, is to learn a little more and spend a little more time uh, doing our due diligence, as it were. It's a term from the financial services industry that it means you do your research on your investment before you put your money down. And you need to do the same thing with relationships. Do your due diligence, learn about them, spend time, discover it, and know yourself, know who you are and what you want, and don't just guess at it. The whole idea is to again, going back a couple of weeks ago, to be crystal clear about what you want, and set your boundaries and say, I'm not going to settle for anything less than this. And when you do, I guarantee you will start finding uh, more people that meet your wants and needs and desires. And when you start seeking those people and you start finding them, you're going to say, yeah. And then you'll set the bar up here, so that when you are dating, you're not going to settle for anything less than extraordinary. And that's my whole premise for coaching, is that I don't want to see anybody go through divorce. There's nothing worse than divorce, and we're all dating again, and looking for new relationships, and I don't want to see any of you, me included, I don't want to see us making the mistakes that we've made in the past. I want us to be able to move forward and find that forever love. And if you're dating from a position of weakness, where you're needy and not healthy emotionally. I just got a question over the weekend about a couple that had broken up. They were both widows or widowers, and the question basically was, he kept talking about his late wife. He'd been widowed for about 5 years. She was widowed for about 3, and it drove them crazy. It drove her crazy that he kept talking about his late wife, and they agreed to turn their spouse's pictures over, and so that they didn't have to see pictures of the other's late spouse. And I just responded that's so silly. That person was a part of their life, a significant part of their lives for a long time. And if he can't stop talking about his late wife, he's not ready to move on. He's looking for somebody to fill a void. And you know and if she's not willing to accept the fact that he's not over her yet, well, they're going to end up in a problem relationship regardless. um let's see. But the point is, I've got a comment here I'm going to bring up in a second. But the point is that if you're starting to turn pictures over, take pictures down, and hide them, that's like that's like that's part of the cancel culture. That's like taking your kids' pictures down once they move out of the house. Who does that? I know I don't. When I get pictures of my kids or grandkids, they're prominently displayed. And now, do you want to have if you still have a shrine to your late spouse, then you're not ready. But it's okay to have a few pictures up here and there, and because that's part of who you are. That's part of your character. That's part of your past. And that part of your life makes you part of who you are now. Mike says, I purchased your book last week and plan to read it this week. I'm hoping to learn a lot from it and hopefully be able to make better decisions going forward. Mike, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I hope you enjoy it, and give me some feedback on it when you do get it. And if you have any questions along the way, just feel free to reach out. You can message me through Facebook, or you can ask questions here. And if you ask questions here, that's great, because you're going to be asking questions that other people have. And it's beneficial to everyone. So thank you again, Mike. I appreciate it. And there's a couple of good books that we recommend in our book, the Dating Backward, and that's The 5 Love Languages, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And then there's another couple of books that I've read over the years is How We Love by Milan and Kay Yurkovich. And it talks about some of the imprinting that we get from our families, from our parents, and how we learn about relationships. And one of the things that I learned about myself a long time ago is I came from a very dysfunctional family. It wasn't physically abusive, but there was verbal abuse, and not to a great extent, but it was still a very dysfunctional family. But when we go through that, when we live that life, we that's what we come to understand as being normal. And when we find relationships, we tend to seek relationships that are similar to mom and dad, and that can really be. And I swear, my ex and I talked about it. My ex was very much like my mother, and I was very much like her father. So, my dad was very dysfunctional and in his relationships, and that's why it's so important for us to continue to learn and become better people, because there's so much garbage that we can drag forward from our families that are so toxic to relationships. So anyway, what other questions have you got? I've pretty much hashed out everything I wanted to say today. If you've got additional questions or more conversation, or even conversation not revolving around or questions not revolving around the five love languages, let me know. You know, and again, this is all building compatibility, or helping you determine compatibility with someone. And only you can determine who's compatible with you and who's not. You know, it's just, we all feel comfortable. We're all different, and we all want different things. But there are people out there that want similar things to what we want. Rod says, I think it's worth noting that only emotionally healthy people can be satisfied when you speak their love language. My last ex was a bucket, was a bucket with many, many holes in the bottom. I didn't have the energy to fill her year after year. It was never full. Oh, I can so totally relate to that. And Rod, you're so correct that emotional health has to be the first component of dating. You know, if you're not emotionally healthy, you're actually going to be seeking somebody that also is not emotionally healthy. You're going to be looking for somebody that either reinforces your issues, or you're going to look for somebody that is healthy in where you're weak, and vice versa. You know, it's a vicious cycle, and until we're all emotionally healthy, um, it just leads to disaster. And hopefully, Rod, you, like I, hopefully you've learned from that. Sounds like you have, just as I have, and that's why it's such a quest. It should be a quest. If you're looking for your soulmate, for your next relationship, it should be a quest to find that right person, and not stop until you do. You know, a lot of people tell me, well, Rick, I'm getting older, and I'm running out of time. Well, you might be, you just might be. But the reality is that um, it's much better to spend only a couple of years with an extraordinary mate than it is to spend, the next 10, 15, or 20 years, or 25 years in a mediocre marriage, and possibly get divorced again. The statistics are against us. Just to get married a second or a third time, the odds of staying married are even less the second and third time around as they are the first time. About 60% of first marriages fail. 60% of second, no, excuse me, I got that reversed. About 60% of first marriages last. They're not all happy. And of second marriages, about 60% of those fail. And the number goes up from there. I think 72% of third marriages fail. So that's why it's so important to be to be so aware, and to be so focused on what you want. It may drive the people nuts, that the people you date nuts, but that's okay. It's it's easier to say goodbye and say, hey, this really isn't working for me, early on, as opposed to a year down the road. Rod says, a few entries on my list, on my must-have list, are about a balanced, healthy emotional life and self-examination. Awesome, Rod. And self-examination is something we should be doing all the time. That should be an ongoing process. I know I'm still, it's almost 64 years old, or about 64 years old. I'm still learning things. I'm still learning things that are my triggers. And when I say triggers, they're emotional triggers that cause me to have an adverse reaction. And when you recognize those things, or it's important to recognize those things and be able to make corrections. You know, if you recognize that something doesn't or something causes a negative reaction, you know, you get angry, you get upset, you throw your hands up and say, "I'm done. Let's call it quit." You know, figure out what those things are, and when you do, you can be a much more emotionally healthy. And I think emotional health in some respects is a relative term. Hopefully we're continuing to get better and to understand ourselves better, so that we can recognize what things mean to us, what things recognize how outside influences affect us. And I'll give you a perfect example. Is I had a couple of weeks ago, I had a situation where I just threw my hands up and said, "I'm out." But as we've talked about it, as we've shared since then, come to learn that she had an emotional reaction based on her past experience, and I was reacting based on uh, a lack of knowledge. I didn't understand this was her trigger. And now it's one of those things that we both learn something. So and that's what we should all be about. We should all be about learning what's going on, what triggers us, what doesn't, what excuse me. Um and that's where the five love languages comes into play. When you speak similar love languages, it's easier to come back together when there's been a misunderstanding, because you naturally communicate uh, a little more effectively with each other. If you're incompatible in way too many areas, then it's just something that you can just use right off and say, "Yeah, I'm done. I'm out. There's just not enough here to keep fighting for." But if there's a lot of compatibility and a lot of other things fall into place, it's worth taking a look at, and uh, making sure that you give it every effort. Now, I'm not saying that if you know it's a toxic relationship, or if you know it's a not a good relationship foundationally, that you keep working at it to try to make it work. No, I'm saying if you have almost everything in place and you're trying to work figure out a couple of the other pieces, then you work on it. But if you uh, if you see that there are bigger, deeper problems, then it's time to walk away. You know. And hey, Rose, thanks for joining in. Rose says hers is physical touch and words of affirmation. Hey, Sylvia, thanks for joining in. Yes, you're very late, but that's okay. We're still here. And Rose, and see, that's good, Rose. It's so important to understand. Circling back, it's so important to understand what your love language is, what your love languages are. It just it it just makes life so much easier. Um, and but I don't want to paint this with such a broad brush that I make it sound like it's a magic wand. It's not. There's no such thing as a perfect relationship. There is extraordinary. There are soulmates, and I truly believe in soulmates. Uh, but all relationships take work. Everybody's going to get their toes stepped on or mashed from time to time. Somebody's going to say something. I'm guilty of saying something because sometimes I just don't have a filter. Sometimes things come out of my mouth before I have before I take an opportunity to think about it. And when you do that, or when that happens, somebody's going to get offended. Somebody's going to get hurt, and then you got to spend some time to mend and heal those wounds. But it's when everything's in place, when you know what you want, when you have a good intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and physical connection. When you speak the right love, or speaking each other's love languages, it just all comes together. But you still have to have that chemistry, and we'll talk more about that next week. Or we can talk about it this week, because chemistry is so important. It's an intangible. It's not something you can see or touch, but it's there. And I've met women that I've that have met all my must-haves. We've had an intellectual, spiritual, emotional, and physical connection. We've spoken similar love languages, but yet there was something missing. And it was the chemistry part of it. The chemistry is kind of a unique, it has to do with hormones and pheromones and a lot of scientific stuff in there, because it actually does exist. And those are all parts of the components that need to be there. It's kind of the excitement of the relationship. And don't misunderstand me, the excitement will wear down after a while, but when you have that chemistry, it's a part of the bond that helps keep you together. Rose says, yes, there has to be a spark. Absolutely. And it's so interesting, especially with online dating. You can see somebody, you can see a written profile, and on paper they look to be just perfect, your soulmate, and you can start to talk to them and have great conversations, but yet when you meet in person, it's like, yeah, what happened? We were having 2 and 3 hour conversations, and now we have a tough time getting 2 sentences together. So it is a very, very palpable, very very real thing. It just is. It's just rare. But and I'm sure all of you have felt a chemistry with somebody, and chemistry can well, let me take a step back. For extraordinary relationships, you need to have chemistry and compatibility. Now, you can have compatibility and no chemistry and still make a relationship work. It can still be good. It won't be extraordinary, but it'll be good. I might even be great, but it still won't be extraordinary. And when you can have chemistry and no compatibility, and that's a recipe for a train wreck. Because and generally the compatibility is or not compatibility, the chemistry, it may be intellectual, it may be physical, and more often than not, the chemistry is physical, and it's can have great sex, and there's nothing else, and then things start to unravel, and you have no foundation. And it's all about building a foundation with someone. It's about feelings that you really can't describe in words. And I know that may sound lame, but oh, folks, when you've met somebody like that, and I think a couple of you on here have had relationships like that and lost those relationships. when you have that, you want that again. You don't want to settle for anything less. For those of us that haven't had it, it's like, hey, Rick, what the heck are you talking about? It's just, you're talking goofy. But when you have it, when you find it, it can be pretty amazing. So anyway, other questions, thoughts, comments? Yep, nothing. So again, it relationships are complex, to say the very least. And the more you know about them, the easier it is to find the right ones, and more importantly, avoid the wrong ones. Because the hardest thing to do is to spend time in a relationship with somebody only. And you may recognize early on, yeah, this isn't really great, but it feels good, and you end up sticking around way too long. I hope that I'm drilling into you guys emphatically that if you're not feeling it, if you recognize it as not the right relationship, that it's time to move on. Don't be afraid that you're not going to find someone better. Don't be afraid that you're not going to find your soulmate. Because your soulmate is out there. You just have to put in the time and the effort to find her or him. Sylvia, yes, there are 5 love languages. They're acts of service, words of affirmation, quality time, gifts, and physical touch. Those are the 5. If you haven't read the book, I highly recommend you read the book. We talk about it. We talk about the 5 love languages a little bit in my book, Dating Backward. But I think they're very, very important to understand, and I think we all should recognize and know what our primary love languages are. Statistically, we do speak all 5 at some level, but we're not fluent in those languages. So I find it extremely important to number one, to know what your love language is, and to be able to identify the love languages of somebody that you want to date. And Mike says, what's your advice on broaching the topic of multiple failed marriages with a dating prospect? Mike, that's a great question. And it's not something I would necessarily blurt out on the first conversation, but I think as you get to know somebody, I think it's important to share. But I also think it's important to share what you've learned from each of those relationships. And because when you've had multiple failed marriages, that's going to start sending up red flags to someone. They're going to wonder why, and it could, and I'm not being judgmental, Mike. The reality is you may have chosen badly, and which is what we all do. I'll say that I chose badly in my first marriage. It doesn't mean that there weren't good things that came out of it. There absolutely were, and I would expect that every one of you had. There were good things in all of your marriages or relationships. It's just they failed for a variety of reasons that most of us can recognize or could have recognized early on had we been paying attention, had we known. So I think it is something that should be broached, and I think for the most part that if you're straightforward and upfront with the lady that you're dating, she'll respect that. But again, I back it up with, yeah, I screwed up here. This is what I did. This is what I learned from this one. And you have to take some responsibility in answering that in in sharing that information. You know, you have to take your responsibility. You can't say, ah, she was crazy. You know, it's just they were all terrible people. Well, then she's going to start to think, yeah, well, yeah, there's got to be another side to this story. Let me talk to them and see what happened. Um, and you know, and just be honest. You know, and again, that's not something. That's not a first date conversation. Uh, if it comes up, have you been married? Yep. Are you divorced? Yep, I'm divorced. How many times have you been married? Well, I've been married 4 times. And then you know the conversation will evolve from there. It may be a first conversation that you know, but you have to be prepared for it. You have to be ready to share your experiences. You might defer it and say there are some situations that I went through that I'm not proud of, that I don't know you well enough to share that deeply yet, but I would be more than happy as we move forward. I'll be more than happy to share with you. You might say something like that. You know, just because it's not always healthy to just share everything that you know right up front. There needs to be a modicum of discretion, I guess, as to how much you let go now, or share now. Um, and Sylvia says, I'll purchase it from your site. Thank you. And Tim Gentry says, hey, Tim, thanks for joining in. Gary Chapman, The 5 Love Languages. Absolutely. That's what we've been talking about. Yeah, it is a great book. There are several versions of it. And for us, I recommend the singles edition because it's all fundamentally the same. It's just written on a just a different slant, and the one for married couples is designed to help you communicate with your spouse. The singles edition is designed to help you, number one, learn about yourself, but also learn how to communicate with somebody new in your life, and learn discover their love languages, how to discover their love languages. So it is a really good book, and I find it highly recommendable, and it's very readable. So anyway, well, we're nearing an hour here, folks, and I appreciate all the questions. Mike, I hope I've given you some things to think about tonight, and thanks for the great input. You know, I hope I answered your last question, Mike, about how much to share. I personally, I believe, you know, you should be an open book. You never want to base a relationship on hidden secret, or, you know, on hiding things, or restricting information. You know, it's almost as, you know, when you omit things, you know, you know, is that still is that it may not, you may not have lied, but it's I guess the error of omission. You know, you didn't quite put it all on the table. You know, and I'm not talking about sharing bank accounts and all that, you know, bank balances and that kind of stuff, but I am suggesting that you be open with questions as they're asked. If you're not comfortable, just say, yeah, I'll be happy to answer that, but I'm not quite there yet. You know, we just haven't developed that deep of a relationship, and let's see where this goes, and I will eventually share all of that with you. And most people will say, oh, okay. And if they say, nope, I'm out, then okay. Then you may have dodged a bullet. You're very welcome, Mike. I appreciate it. So with that, let's wrap this week up, and I hope you all have a great and blessed week. I hope this was helpful for all of you. And next week, we'll figure out what we're going to talk about. We may talk about love languages some more, but odds or chemistry some more, I should say. But odds are it will be something else. It'll be dependent on what happens over the week and over the weekend and how it applies to dating and relationships. Don't forget to, if you haven't, hey Lanny, you're very welcome, I should say. Thanks for being here. Sylvia, thank you. Have a great week to you too. I will see you all next week. Have a great and blessed week. Check out my book, Dating Backward, Practical Guide to Dating and Finding Your Soulmate. Marcia, thanks. Tim, oh, I got one more quick comment here. Tim says, I used to take the book and on the third date, do the questions in the back. There you go. That's a great one. That's a great way to figure out if somebody's on the same page as you are. Anyway, have a great week, everyone. I'll see you next Monday for Monday Mastery live at 5. I love you guys, and see you next week.